What kind of desperate era was the late Eastern Han Dynasty 2,000 years ago? If you don't understand that era, you will never truly understand today's protagonist, and you'll never realize why he sparked the Yellow Turban Rebellion that swept across the entire nation. You see, on the eve of the uprising, he was definitely no desperate outlaw pushed to the brink. In terms of wealth, thanks to years of preaching and donations from his believers, he was already incredibly rich. He wasn't short on cash at all. In terms of power, he founded the way of supreme peace, commanding 36 divisions with hundreds of thousands of die-hard followers spread across half of China. And when it comes to connections, even right beside the untouchable Emperor Ling of Han, among those deeply powerful court eunuchs, he had his own fanatic fans and inside men. Since he had the money, the people, and even the ultimate political umbrella right inside the imperial palace, he could have comfortably lived as an all-powerful religious leader, soaking up the wealth and glory. So why on earth did he choose the deadliest path of all rebellion, just to topple this massive empire? The man we're talking about today is absolutely the most underestimated and most stigmatized figure. He isn't Cao Cao, he isn't Liu Bei, and he isn't Zhuge Liang. He is the man who, 20 years before them, single-handedly shook the world and brought the 400-year-old Han Dynasty crashing down, Zhang Jiao. In the official history books, he's labeled a traitorous rebel. In the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, he's a demonic sorcerer who commands the wind and rain. But today, we are going to strip away 2,000 years of imperial propaganda and myth to bring you the real story of a true grassroots resistance fighter. Before we can judge Zhang Jiao, we must ask, what kind of world created him? Without understanding the late Eastern Han Dynasty, you can never understand why the Yellow Turban Rebellion happened, or decide for yourself whether Zhang Jiao was a villain or a visionary. Let's rewind. The Eastern Han Dynasty was established in 25 CE. Early on, it was an era of prosperity, but by the late 2nd century, the system had suffered a catastrophic collapse. Emperors were placed on the throne as infants. One was barely 100 days old. Because they couldn't rule, absolute power fell into the hands of two warring factions, the imperial consort families and the palace eunuchs. These factions waged a bloody, endless shadow war for control, entirely ignoring the suffering of the populace. It gets worse. The ruling emperor, Ling, actually began selling government offices to the highest bidder. Everything from a local magistrate to the highest imperial ministers had a price tag. And the once wealthy aristocrats bought these offices. They ruthlessly taxed the peasantry to recoup their investments. Outside corrupt capital, the reality for the common people was a living nightmare. Wealthy warlords annexed all the farmland, forcing independent farmers into brutal serfdom or homelessness. As if extreme poverty wasn't enough, the empire was struck by a relentless barrage of natural disasters, floods, locusts, and a horrific plague that coincided with the Antonine Plague in Rome. Entire villages were wiped out. Historical texts describe roads blocked by mountains of corpses and horrific accounts of cannibalism. Imagine being a farmer in that era. You break your back in the fields, only to have your harvest stolen by corrupt tax collectors. When your family falls sick, there is no medicine, no doctor, no hope. You are left to wander the roads, eating tree bark until there is nothing left. This was the absolute, crushing darkness of Zhang Jiao's world. And in this abyss, he appeared, a single ray of light for a desperate people. Let's trace his journey from a common healer to the architect of a revolution. Hit that like button, subscribe, and let's get into it. First, let's look at Zhang Jiao's origins. According to the book of the later Han, he was born in Julu Commandery in modern-day Hebei province. He wasn't born into nobility or a wealthy land-owning family. He was a commoner. Some modern historians theorize he might have been a fostered scholar who turned his back on the corrupt political system to embrace spirituality. People call him a sorcerer, but the truth is, he was the founder of a religious movement called Taiping Dao, the way of great peace. He didn't just invent this out of thin air. His ideology was deeply rooted in a text called the Taiping Chain, the classic of great peace, an early Taoist manuscript that had been rejected by the imperial court for being too unorthodox. So, what did this forbidden book teach? Why did it attract hundreds of thousands of starving peasants? In short, it preached a radical form of utopian equality. It argued that the wealth and the land of the world were provided by heaven for all people and should not be hoarded by a few corrupt aristocrats. It demanded mutual aid, where the rich must help the poor, and promised that virtuous actions would lead to a life free of suffering. Armed with these teachings, Zhang Jiao styled himself the Great Virtuous Teacher, carrying a 9-knot staff. He traveled through the plague-ridden villages of northern China, offering free healing. But his methods were highly unconventional. He didn't rely primarily on herbal medicine. Instead, he used talisman water, fu shui. He would make his patients kneel, confess their sins, and reflect on their wrongdoings before having them drink water mixed with the ashes of burned Taoist incantations. Now, I know what you're thinking. How could magic water cure a plague? There are two historical realities here. First, Zhang Jiao likely possessed genuine medical knowledge and mixed actual herbal remedies into his treatments, which the uneducated peasants interpreted as magic. And more importantly, we must look at the psychology of the era. These people were living under apocalyptic stress. Many of their ailments were psychosomatic, driven by severe trauma and despair. Zhang Jiao's requirement to confess and reflect was essentially a primitive form of intense psychological counseling. He gave them spiritual absolution, a supportive community, and hope. This triggered a massive placebo effect. When their mental burden lifted, their physical health often improved. To the peasants, Zhang Jiao was performing miracles. He also distributed food to refugees while preaching his egalitarian doctrines. In a world of total darkness, Zhang Jiao's actions were a beacon of light. Within a little over a decade, his followers swelled to hundreds of thousands, spreading across 8 major provinces, effectively encompassing half the Han Empire. To manage this massive following, Zhang Jiao demonstrated administrative genius. He organized the believers into 36 fang, or divisions. Each division ranged from a few thousand to over 10,000 members, commanded by the leader, directly answering to Zhang Jiao. This was a highly disciplined paramilitary structure. Think about that for a second. In an era with no internet, no telegraphs, and terrible roads, unifying hundreds of thousands of desperate peasants across an empire requires staggering organizational and mobilization skills. Zhang Jiao was no mere con artist. He was a highly intelligent, charismatic leader. In the beginning, there's little evidence he wanted to be emperor. He simply wanted to create a great peace for the suffering masses. But as he watched the Han government grow increasingly tyrannical and useless, the idea of overthrowing the empire slowly crystallized in his mind. The decision to launch a nationwide rebellion wasn't a sudden impulse. It was the inevitable climax of a society pushed past its breaking point. By 183 CE, Zhang Jiao realized the time for peaceful religion was over. The empire had to be purged by fire. He established a deeply symbolic and rhythmic rallying cry that would echo through Chinese history forever. The azure sky is already dead. The yellow sky will soon rise. When the year is Jiazi, there will be prosperity under heaven. What did this mean? The Zir sky represented the dying, corrupt Han Dynasty. The yellow sky represented the Taiping Dao. And the new, egalitarian world order, Jiazi referred to the upcoming year, 184 CE, the start of a new 60-year calendar cycle. It was a promise that by launching this uprising, the common people could finally live in peace. To build momentum, Zhang Jiao deployed a brilliant psychological warfare campaign. His operatives infiltrated cities across the empire, chalking the word Jiazi on the walls of government buildings and temples, creating an atmosphere of impending doom for the authorities and hope for the peasants. Furthermore, Zhang Jiao planned a daring decapitation strike. He sent his top lieutenant, Ma Yuyanyi, deep into the imperial capital of Luoyang to secretly bribe a dozen powerful palace eunuchs. The plan was flawless. On March 5th, 184 CE, they would launch a coordinated internal coup alongside a massive external invasion to instantly topple the government. Hundreds of thousands of armed believers stood ready, waiting for the signal. But at the absolute 11th hour, catastrophe struck. Revolutions are often undone from the inside. A disciple named Zhang Jiao, terrified of the horrific punishments the empire inflicted on traitors, lost his nerve. He went straight to the Han authorities and spilled everything: the date, the strategies, the lists of commanders. The imperial court fell into a blind panic. Emperor Ling ordered an immediate, brutal crackdown. Within days, Ma Yuanyi was captured in Luoyang and executed by chariot tearing, a gruesome punishment where the victim is pulled apart by horses. Over 1,000 suspected Yellow Turban sympathizers in the capital were rounded up and slaughtered in the streets. When the news of the betrayal and the massacre reached Zhang Jiao in the north, he knew the element of surprise was gone. His inside men were dead. Facing total annihilation, he made a desperate, decisive call. He issued an emergency order to all 36 divisions. Do not wait. Rise up now. In February 184 CE, Zhang Jiao crowned himself the General of Heaven. His brothers Zhang Bao and Zhang Liang became the generals of earth and people. Tying yellow scarves around their hands, hundreds of thousands of peasants picked up their farming tools and marched against the greatest military power in Eastern Eurasia. The Yellow Turban Rebellion had officially begun. In the first 10 days following the uprising, the Han Empire went into shock. Nationwide, the oppressed peasantry unleashed decades of pent-up rage. Armed mostly with farming implements and wooden clubs, they stormed provincial capitals, burned government offices, and executed the aristocrats who had bled them dry. Zhang Jiao led the main force in the north, driving straight toward the provincial capital of Ye. His brothers commanded massive secondary fronts in the central plains. Seeing his empire crumbling, Emperor Ling convened an emergency war council. To save the dynasty, he made a decision that would ultimately act as poison to the empire. He deployed his top 3 veteran commanders, Lu Ji, Huang Fusong, and Zhu Jun. But more crucially, he authorized local aristocratic warlords to raise their own private armies to crush the peasants. This single edict opened Pandora's box. It decentralized military power and directly birthed the warlord era. Famous figures from the 3 kingdoms, men like Cao Cao, Sang Jian, and Liu Beiyou, cut their teeth and built their personal power bases by slaughtering Zhang Jiao's followers. Let's look at how the war turned. The Yellow Turbans fought with fanatical courage, but courage alone cannot defeat heavy cavalry. The turning point occurred at the Battle of Qiangshi. General Huang Fusong was heavily outnumbered and besieged by Zhang Bao's forces. However, Huang Fusong noticed a fatal tactical error. The peasant army, lacking professional military training, had camped in fields of dry, highly flammable grass. In the dead of night, taking advantage of strong winds, the imperial army launched a devastating fire attack. The Yellow Turban camp was instantly engulfed in an inferno. The panic was absolute. Tens of thousands of peasants burned to death or were slaughtered by imperial cavalry as they fled the flames. It was a massacre that shattered the myth of Yellow Turban invincibility. Meanwhile, Zhang Jiao himself was besieged in the northern stronghold of Guangzhou. He fought a bitter defensive war against elite imperial troops, even managing to repel an assault led by the infamous warlord. Dang Zhuo's greatest enemy wasn't the Han military. It was the very disease his movement had tried to cure. In the autumn of 184 CE, at the height of the siege, Zhang Jiao fell gravely ill and died. The loss of their spiritual beacon was a death blow. The movement fractured into leaderless factions. The Han generals showed absolutely no mercy. Zhang Jiao's brothers were hunted down and killed. At the Battle of Shakuyang, the imperial army annihilated the remaining forces, slaughtering over 100,000 Yellow Turban rebels. To commemorate their victory, the imperial commanders ordered the construction of a massive mound of skulls. In less than a year, the main body of the Grand Rebellion was drowned in blood. Though splinter groups would fight a guerrilla war for another 20 years, the dream of the yellow sky was effectively dead. This brings us to a crucial question. How did an uprising of hundreds of thousands of people, which paralyzed half the empire, collapse so quickly? Was it simply because peasants can't fight? The reality involves deep structural causes that plague many historical revolutions. Let's break it down. First and foremost, a profound lack of unified command and military discipline. While Zhang Jiao was a brilliant organizer, his followers were starving farmers. They had no armor, no logistics, and wielded hoes and pitchforks against battle-hardened imperial veterans and heavily armed aristocratic private armies. Furthermore, while the 36 divisions existed on paper, in the chaos of the premature uprising, they fought as isolated pockets. Zhang Jiao in the north, his brothers in the center, they couldn't coordinate effectively. The imperial army simply utilized divide and conquer tactics, destroying them one by one. Second, strategic blunders. When Tangzhou betrayed the movement, the decapitation strike on the capital was ruined. Forced to improvise, the Yellow Turbans resorted to mobile warfare. They captured cities, looted them for survival, and moved on, never stopping to establish a secure base of operations or a functioning alternative government. Without secure supply lines or a safe rear echelon, any tactical defeat immediately turned into an unrecoverable rout. Third, the premature death of the core leader. Zhang Jiao was the spiritual and organizational glue of the entire Taiping Dao. When he died, just months into the fighting, it created a massive power vacuum. Without him, the regional commanders began fighting for control, and morale evaporated. Finally, they triggered a united front of the ruling class. The Yellow Turbans weren't just fighting the emperor. Their demand for wealth redistribution threatened the core interests of every wealthy landowner and aristocrat in China. The rebellion forced the corrupt court and the local warlords to temporarily stop fighting each other and unite to exterminate the peasants. Facing the combined, overwhelming industrial violence of the entire state apparatus, with no external allies, the peasant army was doomed. It was a tragic moth flying into a roaring flame. If Zhang Jiao was fighting to feed the starving and overthrow a tyrannical regime, why has he been cursed for 2 millennia as a demonic villain? The answer is simple, and it represents the universal truth of human history. History is written by the victors, and Zhang Jiao was a loser. The official historical texts, like the Book of the Little Han and the records of the Three Kingdoms, were compiled by the aristocratic scholar official class. These elites despised Zhang Jiao because his movement fundamentally threatened the absolute monopoly on land, wealth, and education. To them, peasants, daring to demand equality, weren't revolutionaries. They were bandits and demons. To maintain the illusion of imperial legitimacy, these historians completely erased the context of mass starvation, framing the rebellion purely as an act of treason fueled by witchcraft. Furthermore, consider the political motives of the warlords who founded the three kingdoms, Cao Cao, Liu Bei, and the San family. They built their entire military and political foundations on crushing the Yellow Turbans. If they admitted that Zhang Jiao's cause was just, they would be admitting that they themselves were the enforcers of an evil, oppressive empire. Therefore, they had to perpetuate the smear campaign, branding Zhang Jiao a villain to justify their own rise to power. Centuries later, the famous 14th century novel, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, cemented his fate in pop culture. To make the story more entertaining, and to align with the feudal values of absolute loyalty to the emperor, the author Luo Guanzhong transformed Zhang Jiao from a tragic populist leader into a literal wizard, casting weather spells. But when we strip away the imperial propaganda and the mythological fiction, we see a profound truth. Zhang Jiao terrified the elite because he broke their monopoly on knowledge and power. His Taiping Dao allowed illiterate, impoverished peasants to organize, find spiritual strength, and fight back. He wasn't a demon. He was a desperate champion, born from a desperate age, pushed to the absolute brink. Though his physical body was destroyed, Zhang Jiao's impact on the trajectory of Chinese history is irreversible. First, the Yellow Turban Rebellion completely shattered the foundation of the Han Dynasty. The imperial court decision to decentralize military power to crush him directly triggered the collapse of central authority, raising the curtain on the epic, bloody saga of the Three Kingdoms. But his legacy goes much deeper. Zhang Jiao provided a spiritual and organizational blueprint for grassroots resistance that would be used for the next 1,700 years. From the Huangchao Rebellion in the Tang Dynasty to Li Zizheng in the Ming, all the way to the Taiping Rebellion in the 19th century, whenever the Chinese peasantry was pushed to starvation by a corrupt regime, they instinctively echoed Zhang Jiao's methods, rising up to challenge absolute imperial power. Speaking objectively, Zhang Jiao was not a flawless saint. It is true that as the peasant armies lost central control, many devolved into banditry and caused widespread destruction. But we cannot let the brutality of the war, or the victor's narrative, obscure the purity of his original intent. In a pitch-black era, where the ruling elites cared only for their political games and traded human lives like dirt, Zhang Jiao was the first to stand up and say, "We are born equal, and we have a right to live." That courage, the willingness of a common healer to stand before the overwhelming violence of an entire empire and demand justice, demands our respect. He proved that even the mighty Son of Heaven could bleed. And there you have it. That is the true story of Zhang Jiao, a commoner from Zhulu who, amidst the literal hell of the late Eastern Han, used the philosophical text and psychological healing to rally hundreds of thousands of desperate souls, launching a rebellion that shook China to its core. Cursed as a demonic sorcerer by official historians and exaggerated as a wizard by novelists, the historical truth reveals a deeply compassionate grassroots pioneer who dared to fight systemic injustice. Oh, I turn the question over to you. After learning the true historical context, has your view of Zhang Jiao changed? Is he a misguided extremist whose rebellion caused too much collateral damage? Or is he a tragic hero who fought a necessary war against a wicked empire? Let me know down in the comments. I read all of them, and I'd love to debate this with you. If you enjoyed peeling back the layers of this historical myth and want more deep dives into untold histories, please hit that like button, subscribe, and share the video. Your support is what makes these deep dives possible. Next time, we might just tackle the man who profited most from the chaos Zhang Jiao left behind, the brilliant, ruthless warlord Cao Cao. Until then, remember, history is a tapestry of perspectives. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.